almost done. Hey everybody, it's Joe the 3D printing professor, and I am just finishing up with the Cute Cthulhu and Friends Kickstarter, but I wanted to take a time out to review the Revopoint Pop 2 scanner. Now I need to acknowledge that I have had this scanner in my possession for quite a while actually, and I haven't made a review of it. And part of the reason for that is that every time I use it, I'm reminded of why it kind of sucks. But then when I use a different 3D scanner, I'm reminded of why the Revopoint Pop 2 scanner is probably the best 3D scanner that I've used. And all those things that I think suck about it are actually what sucks about 3D scanning in general. Now, this video is going to be a little bit more off the cuff than usual, but I just want to talk a little bit about why 3D scanning sucks, but why the Revopoint Pop 2 gets it right. You know, coming from the 3D printing world, we've got this honestly kind of skewed view of the way things are. Because in the 3D printing world, it's possible to buy a 3D printer for only $200. It's not going to be the best 3D printer. Heck, $600 will get you, honestly, a solid, mid-range, really good 3D printer. But with 3D scanners, $600 is the baseline and only goes up from there. This is because doing 3D scanning is honestly very complicated. I mean, you would think that running 4 motors in a coordinated way was complicated, and it is. But 3D scanning, most of these small 3D scanners have at least 1, maybe 2 cameras in there, and possibly a pico projector as well. And then there's the software. In 3D printing, we have things like Cura and Marlin and even Clipper, a new software developed and then put out into the world for no cost. Whereas with 3D scanners, there is no low or no cost option that people can just piggyback off of. And by people, I mean manufacturers, that they can bootstrap their research and development by just taking the free version. There is no free version of scanning. So everybody who's doing scanning is having to develop the software pretty much from scratch, which means that they have to pass on those research and development costs to you. Then there's the fact that 3D scanning is actually kind of complicated. Half of what 3D scanners do dive into an area of computer science called computer vision. And okay, when you and I look at the world with our fleshy eyeballs, we can discern all kinds of information, not the least of which being depth. And there are some people who can pretty accurately gauge depth using just their eyes. It's called eyeball estimation, and if you practice it, you get pretty good at it. But if we can't tell the exact shape of something, our imaginations can make up the difference. We can even fill in the back of an object just by seeing the front of it because we go, it probably continues on in that same way. But with 3D scanners, no, they want to be as precise as possible because this isn't just about getting something that's vaguely shaped like the thing that you want. This is a measuring tool, so it can't guess. It has to know. And if it can't see something, it just can't even imagine what it would be because it doesn't have an imagination. Turning an actual physical object into a series of points that could be rendered on your computer requires a lot of math. And yes, okay, most of that math is solved, but it's still a lot of complicated math. And come on, do you want to be doing the homework? Then there's the fact that 3D scanning really can't do creases, or for that matter, sharp points out. Take, for instance, this piece right here, super detailed with lots of little creases in it. But if I 3D scan it, it's like all those little creases are going to be filled in with mud. It's just not going to get down into there. And that's for a couple of reasons. First of all, it can't really see down into small areas because its view is going to be obstructed from different angles. But then there's also the fact that whenever a 3D scanner scans something, it takes a sampling of points around the thing, and then it just, smooths it according to that sampling of points. So unless one of those points lands way deep inside of that crease, and the next one and the next one and the next one, it's just going to smooth over those creases no matter what you do. So if 3D scanning sucks so bad, why do we even want to do it? Well, because 3D scanning is an amazing tool for modeling. Let's say that you've got an object, maybe something broke, and you want to reproduce it in CAD. Well, you could pull out your calipers and start measuring and hope that you get things right, but things that go at strange angles or holes that are in weird places, that's always really difficult to gauge with calipers and measure. So you could get more precise measuring tools that can measure angles, or you could take that part, throw it on your 3D scanner, and get a really close approximation of what that shape is. Import that approximated shape into your CAD software and model around it. Sure, you're probably going to want to still keep the calipers on hand just to be sure that your measurements of that hole are more precise, but it will give you a basis for working around that will enable you to model things faster, easier, and more accurate to the original shape. Or let's say that you're modeling minis and you aren't very good at digital tools, or you just prefer to work with your hands. Well, you could get a lump of clay. You could sculpt that mini, and you probably would want to do it in double size. And you would get the full feedback of having a thing in front of you while you sculpt it that you can look at from 3 dimensions. Take that thing, throw it on your 3D scanner, scan it in, and like I said, if you sculpted it bigger and then shrunk it down, all of those shortcomings of the tiny details that get lost that I was talking about earlier, well, those get shrunk down and hidden so that the final result actually looks pretty good. Another problem is if you try to scan people. Handsome dude here, right? If you try to scan a person, a human being, people don't hold still. Even when they're playing statue, they move ever so slightly. And like I said, the scanner tries its best to be super precise. So those tiny movements as you're moving from one pass of the scan to another as you're trying to scan another part might not be aligned. This particular model, I had to go back in and clean up all over the place. And even with all of the cleanup that I did, there are still little holes and pock marks in the model that I just didn't want to take the time to clean up. But essentially what I did was I took the 3D scan of myself and used it as a basis, again, for doing a 3D sculpt of myself. I did slim myself up just a little bit for this project. So we've talked a little bit about why 3D scanning sucks. Let's talk about how the Revopoint 2 does it better than just about anybody else. The Revopoint 2 is a compact mid-range scanner. That is to say, it can scan small things. It can even go handheld and scan big things if you want, about as big as a human bust. I don't know if it will do a whole human being. I haven't tried because it kind of strains the software a little bit to do that. But it does work in that mid-range. And if you need to scan something small, it'll do it. If you need to scan something bigger, it can do it. It has an accuracy of 0.1 millimeter, and in my experience, it's actually closer than that for the details that it can get. It's accurate enough that when I bring an object that I've scanned with the Revopoint into my CAD software, if I model it just to the scan, I'm usually pretty dead on to what I measure with my calipers. Now, one thing that I really like about the Pop 2 is that it has a single cable for plugging into your computer. There's no secondary cable for plugging into a power source to give it any additional power. I don't know how they managed to do it, but everything that you need to do on this scanner comes through a single cable, and it just works. Now, they do have setups for this to make it mobile, which includes, instead of having this stand to put it on, a battery pack that you can put it on, and then you plug the cable into the battery pack and the battery pack into the computer, and then you have it mobile. Or you can take it and plug it into your phone if you have a phone that is compatible, and I don't. So I never did try it or use it with the phone setup, but just using it with the computer setup tethered to the laptop as I did, it worked fine. Now, another thing that the Pop 2 does right is it works with my laptop. Now, my laptop is my mobile workstation, and oftentimes I just use it to remote into a more powerful computer. But for scanning, I loaded up the software and I ran it in this slightly less powerful laptop. It's not top of the line, it just works for what I need it to. Actually worked with their software. Now, I will say that when I was using this on the laptop, the slightly less powerful computer, I wasn't able to do some of the fancier scannings. I couldn't scan a whole person or even a big object that you scan and move around as you do it. It just, for the most part, ran out of memory, maybe processing power, I don't know. It worked best when I was mobile, when I would put it stationary, point it at the turntable, and then use the turntable with it. Just a couple of times around, even lay the part down so that I can get different angles on it. But it worked great in those stationary scans on a less powerful laptop. And you might be like, well, I don't know, shouldn't it? Well, trust me, other scanners that I've used don't even look at this laptop. They won't even use it. They won't even try to do it. So being able to use this machine mobily with hardware that isn't as powerful means that this is a tool that I actually use, and that's a big deal. Let's also talk about the turntable that they include. I love how these turntables have cool little patterned sheets on them, but what's cool about the Revopoint turntable is it's untethered. It runs on batteries. You can tether it. You can plug it in if you don't want to run it on batteries, but it does run on batteries, which means I don't have to think about, well, where am I going to plug the turntable in? Who cares? It's on batteries. I'll put it anywhere I want. Now, that does mean that this particular system doesn't have the turntable and the scanner working together. Some systems, the scanner takes a scan from a particular angle and then says, okay, you can move now, and it rotates. But the Revopoint Pop 2 scans quickly, quick enough that it doesn't need the turntable to hold still before it turns. So it's okay with saying, you just go, you do your thing, I'll pick up the data that I want from it. And it does. Now, the Pop 2 isn't the only scanner that Revopoint sells. In fact, at this point, you can buy a Pop 2 still, and it's a great scanner, but you can't buy it directly from Revopoint because they've moved on to the Pop 3. However, I've looked at the Pop 3 and it looks to me like it's just a Pop 2 with possibly some upgraded electronics on the inside, maybe some upgrades to the software, but it hasn't changed the turntable at all. Editing Desk Joe here to say that I got a hold of a representative from Revopoint to ask them some questions about their scanner, and they informed me that most of what I said was true except for one thing. Their turntable has changed and it is no longer battery operated. Now, I will go on record as saying that for me, that's a step backwards because of the inconvenience of having to find a place to plug it in convenient to your 3D printer. But that said, as I mentioned before, the scanner and the turntable are not tied to each other. We're not communicating with the table to tell it when to turn and stuff like that. It just goes consistently, meaning you can swap it out for just about any turntable that's out there. Or if you're concerned about portability, you could get a battery pack to plug it into, because it doesn't have to be plugged into your computer or it doesn't have to be plugged into your scanner. Again, they're not communicating with each other. It just needs power. So however you get it power, it'll run just fine. Or if you get a battery operated turntable for which there are a multitude of options, and just take the plate that they have on top and put it on your new turntable, you will be in business as well. So lots of options there, but it is no longer battery operated. That is a change on the Pop 3. Other than that, all the other changes on the Pop 3 look like big pluses. So that's good to know. Nevertheless, if you're the sort of person who this mid-range scanner doesn't work for because you are the sort of person who's going to take a bunch of minis and scan them, well, they have a mini scanner that's designed to scan smaller things. Or if this mid-range scanner doesn't work because you're the sort of person that's going to be scanning bigger things like parts for automobiles or something like that, well, then they have a range scanner that can scan bigger things. So Revopoint is one of the only companies that I know that can tailor your scanning experience to your specific needs. And that's a big deal too. Is the Pop 2 perfect? No, not by a long shot. But the problems with it aren't necessarily the problems with the Pop 2. They're the problems with scanning in general. Revopoint, working with those shortcomings, managed to make a tool that's easy enough and practical enough to actually use. And that's important because an unused tool is a useless tool. But that's it for this video. I want to thank you very much for watching, and I want to remind you that you are a child of God, so you're special to me. So take care of yourself, and if you can, someone else too. I'll see you next time.